Little Mercy. So just to be clear, you want us to build a trading post for you to use? Bulligan was intrigued by the offer from the scarred orc. Aye, that's right. I want to be able to send my folks here and know that they're going to be able to trade what I send them with. No use being sent and coming back with them, is there? The orc took a long drag from their pipe and continued, Basically, as I see it, everybody wins. You get a bunch of useful herbs, we get some really good quality lye as well, and maybe if trade goes well we can expand it and each get stuff we can't get elsewhere. There was something about that last point that made the young apothecary pause, but he couldn't quite place it. So why do you need to be able to go to this envoy? Why not just go to the senator or the consul if you're having problems? The scarred orc smiled in a way that was reminiscent of a knife. Well, I don't want to have to annoy the consul or the senator just because some traveller decided to try to cheat me. No, much better for the person that benefits from this excellent trade to be the one that has to deal when people overstep their position. Overview. After the recent bloodletting, an awful silence descends upon the barons. The Ravin fortify their minds in readiness for the final assault, but it never comes. The great forest orcs pull back into their forest, fearful of upsetting their powerful neighbour. The Karass strut confidently across the lands they claim, but if they hanker to settle more feuds, they show no signs of it. Perhaps they sense their brutal destruction of the Vendari has not won them any friends. When word spreads that the army of the Black Wind have returned to the barons in force, it seems as if the land itself holds its breath. But the army doesn't attack. It moves cautiously towards the lands claimed by its sept, as if unsure of the terrain or what enemies they face. The armies of Dawn stationed in the barons keep a watchful eye on them, but they make no attempt to finish the butchery that the Iron Helms started. Then something strange happens. As winter gives up its claim on the lands and the first flowers of spring unfurl their blooms, the chatter of birds begins to spread across the blood-soaked land. The Dornish are the first to respond, like a great bear emerging from their sleep after the snows. The people of Dawn continue to focus on Dawnguard and the Carmine Fields, mindful of the words of the National Assembly, but inspired by the inaugural address of Emperor Vesna. More and more folk travel to the territory each week, pushing east to claim lands now abandoned by those that war has claimed. They are not the only ones to venture forth. Eagle-eyed Dornish scouts spot members of all the remaining septs visiting with each other. Ravin and Black Wind and Karass, Ravin and Great Forest and Black Wind, Karass and Menrathat and Great Forest. Spring has come to the barons, banishing the dolorous silence of winter. The frozen rivers thaw into babbling brooks. The winds that blow are still cold, but now they are filled with whispered conversations. Ravin and the Black Wind. The cruel actions of the Iron Helms have forced the army of the Black Wind to return to the barons. They arrived on the final day of the winter solstice, advancing cautiously towards their homes, fearful of a trap or ambush. No imperial army has as dark a reputation for ruthless cruelty as the Iron Helms. Had they remained in the barons with orders to threaten the Black Wind, then the army would have been forced to surrender. Had the Empire been minded to, they could have forced the Black Wind to switch sides by threatening to wipe out their people if they didn't obey, just as the Druj did. But that hasn't happened. The Iron Helms have departed the barons, leaving two Dornish armies to keep an expectant but wary eye on the Black Wind. Each are alert to any possibility of attack from the Druj army, but that hasn't happened either. The vanguard of the Black Wind army arrived in the barons early on the last day of the winter solstice. The rest of the army followed a few days later, crossing into Saltmarsh. The Black Wind soldiers kept clear of both the eastern sky and the golden sun, and with each of the Dornish armies given clear instruction to only spill blood if they were attacked, there has been no fighting. Instead, the army has been allowed to spread like a shadow into the bitter strand where the first of the Sept's settlements lie. The army are planning to try and evacuate as many of their people from the barrens as possible. In each settlement, long discussions are had. Abandoning the barrens would likely mean never seeing their homes again. Moving to the Malum would see them firmly put under the thumb of the Buruk Tepel, something that few are willing to accept while there are any better choices. Delegates soon arrive from their cousins in the Ravin, from whom the Sept split only a few years ago. Their position is only marginally more secure. The Senate have declared them to be foreigners, but what is given can be just as quickly taken away. The Ravin urge the Black Wind to change Sept, in the hope that they can yet have a future in the Barrens, and it is clear the prospect appeals to many. There are also envoys from the Great Forest Orcs and the Karas, though what they speak of is unclear. By the time the spring equinox approaches, some clarity is beginning to emerge. Roughly 1/3 of the Black Wind living in the Barrens plan to change Sept and rejoin the Ravin, determined to stay in their homes even at the risk of death at the hands of their enemies. The remaining members of the Sept are planning to flee the Barrens, with the army intending to cover their retreat as they head east to get away from the Empire. They face a grim future in the Malum. But for many Black Wind, the Iron Helms have demonstrated that the Empire is every bit as bad as the Druj. As the summit draws near, the decision is made. A representative of the Black Wind will accompany a Druj delegation to Anvil to speak on the matter with the Imperial Consul in the hope of convincing the Empire to let their people withdraw. Poisoned words. A few days before the spring equinox, a young Dornish hunter arrives in Anvil, carrying a message from the Druj to the civil service. The scroll she carries is from Akan Wormspeak, a Tepel and apparently a skilled negotiator. Akan demands a formal audience with the Imperial Consul in the Senate building on Saturday. Akan claims to be empowered by the Buruk Tepel to make deals on behalf of the Druj, and says he wants to discuss the matter of the Black Wind. Wormspeak will arrive with a small retinue, including a representative from the army, and hopes the Imperial Consul will do likewise. In the interest of honest and fair negotiations, they invite those with an interest in the affairs of the Barons to come to the Senate building to witness the negotiation. Akan and their retinue will arrive at the main gates of Anvil shortly before the meeting, and will allow themselves to be escorted to the Senate under guard, if that would make their imperial counterparts feel more comfortable. The magistrates would like to remind everyone that while they are in Anvil under a flag of peace, and while travelling to and from Anvil, the Druj are protected by imperial law. Steel Jaws. The simple fact remains that the Black Wind, army and Sept both, are still considered enemies of the Empire. They are not protected by imperial law. Anyone can attack them with impunity. The army came to the Barons expecting to surrender to the Iron Helms, but with the Iron Helms nowhere to be found, they have tentatively explored a different course of action. Nonetheless, the army is out of position, out of supply, and deep in enemy territory. Its position is precarious in the extreme, and it is very vulnerable. A concerted attack by Imperial armies against the Druj army would allow the Empire to take advantage of how exposed the army is. Casualties from an Imperial attack on the Black Wind would be increased by 1/5, above and beyond those that their orders would normally inflict. The Druj army will struggle to fight back, and the casualties it would inflict will be reduced by 1/5. In addition to any penalties from their orders from their planned retreat. The Empire would be almost certain to win the ensuing conflict, in which case the Black Wind would be forced to flee east, out of the Barrens, with soldiers sacrificing their own lives to protect their people, assuming they didn't do enough damage to disband the army. Forged Hope. Last season, Janik, a representative of the Ravin, made the journey to Anvil to meet with the Imperial Orcs in secret. During the second night, they met with several Imperial Orcs to discuss the reality of the Sept and where it stands in the Barrens, making an impassioned plea for help. The next day, the Imperial Senate voted to recognize the Ravin as foreigners. It is a small step, but an important one, and coupled with the statements made by Bleakshield Zora and Stiv in the Imperial Orc Assembly, it has given them some measure of hope that they may yet find a way to survive and reunite their Sept with the Black Wind. They have redoubled operations in the Fangs, frantically seeking to forge enough mithril weapons and armour so that they have some hope that they can defend themselves when the time comes. In the meantime, they have used the protection and freedom being a foreigner grants them to travel the Barrens, talking with the Black Wind, the Karass, the Great Forest Orcs, and those Imperial Orcs they encounter on the way. Most of their efforts have been focused on the Black Wind. More than anything, the Sept longs to reunite with their former Sept mates. They have succeeded in persuading some members of the Sept to throw their lot in with the Ravin, in the hope that the latest Imperial peace will last. When word comes that the Imperial Orcs Assembly have invited the Ravin to return, they respond with enthusiasm. Having succeeded once already, there is hope that Janik might succeed a second time, and this time they can travel openly to speak with the Imperial Orcs and the Imperial Consul. Their deepest hope is that the Imperial Orcs will help them find a way to convince all the Black Wind to join the Ravin. That seems very difficult. The Black Wind are set on issuing orders to evacuate their people, but a strongly worded treaty might achieve it. But it would also be dangerous. It would mean an independent army in the Barrens, and the Ravin absorbing the Sept who are most openly hostile to the Empire. Great Forest Orcs. The Imperial massacre of the Montanians has struck the Great Forest Orcs hard. The humans were the Sept's closest allies. It was they that encouraged the Orcs to take shelter in the Empire, and the two people walked the Trods together for many years alongside the Navarre. Nobody imagined the Montanians would ever be able to settle in the Empire. Their religious convictions were too strong, and their passion for freedom too great. But the onslaught took all the Septs by surprise, and shocked the Great Forest Orcs to their core. Those who survived the attack have taken shelter in the Great Forest, where the Sept are careful to keep them well away from Imperial eyes. Now the leaders of the Sept are fearful that they will be next. They have a treaty with the Empire that protects them, but treaties can be renegotiated. That treaty also explicitly included the Briars the Great Forest Orcs considered to be part of their Sept, and that didn't save the Montanians. The Great Forest Orcs have pored over the wording of their treaty and discovered that it never actually mentioned the Montanians by name. They had simply assumed they were included. And there is a sinking realization that it wouldn't matter anyway. Who would the Great Forest Orcs complain to if the treaty were broken? A powerful nation like Axos or the Jotun might decry the Empire to the world if they break a treaty. Who would the Great Forest Orcs run to? The Druge? The reality for the Great Forest Orcs is that the Empire could wipe them out in a heartbeat, and almost nobody would know. Outside the Barrens and the Empire itself, the only people who would ever even know are the Druge, and nothing would give them greater pleasure than to see the Empire wipe the Great Forest Orcs out. Indeed, they know if the Druge ever return to the Barrens, their enslavement will be high on the vengeful Orcs' list of priorities. Those who betray the Druge for the Empire know that there is no forgiveness. Their only remaining ally, their last hope of survival as they see it, is the Navarre. Few Great Forest Orcs believe that the Empire would stay their hand if it were not for the Navarre. They are careful to avoid contact with the Dornish settlers, keen to avoid anything that might draw the Empire's ire. But any Navarre who travel to the Great Forest Orcs find themselves treated as honest and respected guests, as if they are dignitaries of a great power no matter their station in life. Thus they discover that the National Assembly of Navarre have upheld a statement of principle raised by Corey Wayfarer with a greater majority, which reaffirmed their friendship and concluded that those that endanger our friends the great forest orcs will face the fury of our nation. The statement has raised hope among the great forest orcs that the Navarre will continue to protect them from the Empire, politically and militarily, if needed. Reassurance. At the moment, the great forest orcs are keen to minimize contact with the Empire. They no longer believe the treaty they signed will protect them if the Empire chooses to discard it, and they don't know how much they can continue to trust the assurances of the Senate. Their plan is to avoid antagonizing anyone and hope that the Empire sticks to the spirit of its agreements. Probably the only thing that could change that now is if the Navarre swore an oath to protect the great forest orcs. A strongly worded oath, bound with appropriate hearth magics, would reassure the great forest orcs that the Empire would not turn on them next. If the nation wishes to assuage the fears of the great forest orcs, they can use a mandate to encourage people to swear an oath to protect the Sept, both those in the barons and those living in Navarre territories in all corners of the Empire. Becca Loomtree has provided the wording for a mandate to the civil service that, if enacted, would see a significant portion of Navarre take up the oath. We have worked with the great forest orcs for years, and we shall continue for generations to come. We send named priest with 50 doses of Liao to encourage Navarre to consider swearing an oath to protect the orcs of the great forest. Synod Mandate, Navarre Assembly. Traditionally, the Navarre mark vows, oaths, and promises with a physical sign of their intent and commitment, usually through tattooing or scarification. Such decisions are not to be taken lightly. There is powerful hearth magic in such oaths. There are credible reports that the tattoos or brands of oath-breakers may twist into wounds that permanently weaken their bearer, or torment them with dreams and visions of their betrayals. If the Navarre swear such an oath and break it, the outcome will be terrible to behold. The great forest orcs have spent long enough with the Navarre to know all of this. If this mandate is enacted, then the fears of the great forest orcs will be soothed. Those who have established steadings in Herkinia and Miaren will be reassured that they can continue to build lives alongside the Navarre. Some of those who still live in Theranin will remain behind, even as most of them return to the heart of Pétard, the bonds of friendship strengthened. They will send a delegation of their leaders to speak with the Navarre at the summer solstice, so they may witness the leaders of the Navarre swear the oath and mark it in an appropriate way. If that happens, they will be open to discussions of how their relationship with the Navarre and the Empire may evolve and grow in the years to come. If the mandate is not enacted at the spring equinox, then the orcs of the Great Forest will see themselves as having no choice but to abandon the Empire. A scant few might remain in the homes they have created in the Navarre territories, but the vast majority of them will return to the heart of Pétard. The Holt of the Oak will probably be abandoned, as will the camps at the Golden Trees of Seren, the Heartwood of the Great Vale, and the Thimble. Where possible, the Great Forest Orcs will avoid all contact with the Empire, and to a lesser extent the Navarre, focusing on building their defences for the attack they imagine must be inevitable. Karas. As news of Empress Vesna's address spreads across the barons, the response from the Karas is positive. The Sept seems to be comfortable with their position as foreigners in the Empire. They are happy to pay tax, though it is difficult to assess the scale of their estates in the untrod groves and the bleaks. They profess to have no problems following imperial law, though it is not certain they understand it well. They seem to be at peace with the barons under the control of Dawn. When pushed on the matter, they only shrug, and point out that, unlike the other Septs, they never rebelled or caused trouble for the rulers of the barons. They got on well with the Druge, why should they not get on just as well with the Dornish? In fact, why not formalise the new relationship and find ways to benefit both the Karas and the Dornish? Trading at Carmine Field. Anka Karas is the closest thing that the Sept has to a representative to Dawn. She has spent the last 3 months in Carmine Fields, offering all kinds of herbs in exchange for measures, ingots, and mana crystals. Anka has made it clear that she would like to formalize this arrangement. If Dawn constructs a trading post in the Carmine Fields, then she will deliver some of her finest herbs in exchange for a steady supply of Beggar's Lie. Anka makes clear that she expects whoever is appointed to organize this trade to be responsible for representing the Empire to the Sept. The envoy to the Karas would not be an ambassador. They wouldn't receive a briefing from the civil service, nor would they be able to present treaties to the Senate, but they would be the first point of contact for the Sept if they have problems that need to be resolved. If the trade goes well, then Anka suggests it might be possible to expand the trade later to include more exotic potions that the Karas know how to make. A crop of conversations. It is not clear who is responsible, but those with the power to detect magic are soon able to confirm that a powerful enchantment has enshrouded the land. The ritual has woven subtle threads of autumn magic into the land's tapestry, borne from person to person as they converse. Those touched by the spell find themselves able to take joy in conversation with those around them, spawning 1,000 discussions that lead to 1,000 more. The magic offers no guidance or direction, no purpose to this joyful elocution, bar a harvest of communication, a scintillating shower of conversations that cascade across the imagination, with subjects spanning thought horizons from lamentations to celebrations, from loss to love, from fears to hopes. It is not clear what the casters of this magic intended, but it is clear what the result is. People in the Barrens are talking to each other. Participation, the Barrens. Anyone whose personal resource is in the Barrens can start the event still under the effects of the ritual. If so, you experience the following role-playing effect. You feel an urge to engage in conversation with people you wouldn't usually choose to. Expanding your influence feels like a worthy goal. Some people have found the ritual affects the way they speak and write. If you feel comfortable attempting it, you can try to make your speech more verbose or grandiose, more lyrical or poetic, more captivating and compelling. The ritual only directly affects speech, but it does give people confidence to share poetry and writing they've created. The effects of this ritual will gradually weaken over time until it ends at dusk on Saturday.